Hey guys, today we're going to show you how to do a clutch kit install on the new 2016 RZR Turbo. This will be the same on the 2-seater and the 4-seater, but we'll show you a quick run through of how to install the clutch, or the clutch kit, and take the clutches apart on it. Alright, so the first thing you're going to want to do is jack up the rear of the machine, making sure it's going to stay safe and not tip over on you and stuff. You want to jack it up just so that the tire's just skimming off the ground a little bit, and then you're going to remove the bottom shock bolt. We've already done it to kind of speed up the video a little bit, but you just pull that bolt out, and then you can lift the shock up and out of there, and then we'd just like to swing it forward out of the way. You can leave the top bolt in. Then the next step is take your hose clamp off of here, off the vent line. Let's pull that off. Set that off to the side so it's out of the way. And that'll get you to the clutch cover. Again, we've removed a couple of these already just to speed up the video, but remove the bolts and then carefully take this off so you don't wreck the gasket. That should pop off pretty easy. And that'll get you to the clutches. And what you'll see in here is this is the primary clutch. This is all new design for Polaris on the 2016 turbos. So it's a little bit different than the ones you typically see on most other Polarises. But this is going to be your primary clutch on the motor, sometimes called the drive clutch. And this is your driven clutch or your secondary clutch on the transmission. Obviously you got your belt in the middle here. So we'll show you how to take that apart and swap the parts out. Alright, the first step to take both clutches off, the easiest way I like to do it is you should have this belt removal tool in your tool kit or in your glove box or your machine. If you don't have them, EPI does sell them. EPI part number is SCP2. Basically what it is, you got these two little holes in here. They both should be threaded. Just thread it into one of them. And as you thread this in, it's going to spread the clutch open, which is going to let the belt drop down and take the tension off the belt. And this gives you a little bit easier work with the clutches and stuff when the belt is loose on there. You don't have to go crazy on everything. Right there is probably all we need. So then what we want to do is to get the primary clutch off, we want to use a small bar like this or a big screwdriver and stick it through the clutch and hold it. The big thing is you want to make sure you're on the outside edge of these towers. You don't want to be in through here where you can damage into this part. And then also watch where you're sticking it on the frame or how you're holding it so you don't wreck any brake lines or wiring or anything like that on it. But then you just take off the bolt here. This one's a 21 millimeter. And there's a couple washers on here, just make sure you keep track of those. And then to pull the clutch off, you want to use a clutch puller. This is part number PCP8 from EPI. You basically just thread it in there. You want to thread it in by hand. You don't want to use the impact wrench on this because you can damage the clutch, the puller, or the crankshaft, so you don't want to hurt anything there. As you thread that in, it's going to get tight, and then you got to crank on it. Do it with an extension here so you guys can see a little bit better, but again, just make sure this bar is going to go the other way, so make sure you're not wrecking anything inside the clutch there. And when it comes up and around, make sure it's not going to bind on any wires or brake lines or anything. And just crank on it, and you don't want to go crazy. Sometimes they pop right off, sometimes they make a pop noise, and sometimes they don't want to come at all. If you're really cranking hard and it doesn't come with it, then what you want to do is when it has tension on it, take a little hammer and just tap on it square right on the end of the puller. Not hard, just give it a little love tap, and usually that vibration is enough to kind of pop it off, but we'll see if this one comes off or not. This one's been on and off a couple times, but let me grab a hammer real quick. Get a little love tap square. Still not coming. So you give it, try to tighten it. If you have a big impact and you start cranking on it, you can break the puller now, or you can damage the crankshaft itself. And these are torqued on there to like 95 foot-pounds, so they come off pretty hard sometimes. Alright, so now this popped and the clutch is loose in here. So you just want to pull out your bar and then just unthread the puller. And then the clutch should come right off. And here's your primary clutch. And then we'll work on getting the secondary clutch off. You can pull your belt off now pretty easily. Just set that off the side. One thing when you do work on the belt, make sure when you come off, make sure and pay attention what direction your writing is going down your belt. You want to read it from left to right. Especially if you're putting a new belt on, that's how you always want to run it. There should be an arrow for indication, or you go by the wording on there. If for some reason your belt is backwards and you take it off, you're going to reuse that, make sure you put the belt on however the same way it came off. That way you don't wreck anything that way. But then you unthread this. This part's a little bit different on the turbos than the other ones too. You take this bolt off, which is a 15mm socket. So once you pull this bolt out, there's a bolt and a washer on there. Set that aside. And this is where it's a little bit different than most of the normal Polaris. There's actually a snap ring in here. It has a snap ring, and there's 2 washers. So just make sure you keep track of those. Set those aside. Once you get those there, the clutch will come apart. And here's the back side of the clutch. Alright, so now we're going to take apart the secondary clutch. I always like to try to mark everything, that way when you put everything back together, you know you got it lined up properly. So what we did here is I just put a 1 on this triangle piece because that's going to come out, and 1 on the helix ends. And then here's a 2, and then these are 0. You can use whatever you want just to keep track of them. One thing to watch is if you do clean up the clutches really good with brake cleaner or something, you might wipe those off, so just kind of pay attention to that. The other thing we do is when you have this clutch off, the 2 clutch halves will come apart. So I always put an X there and on the outer sides here. That way when you take it apart, you know you put it back together the same way it came apart. So we just do that before you take it apart. And then we got our CCT 510 clutch tool in here. The clutch compression tool will slide this down in there. And it fits a little bit different on this one than it does the normal tools. It'll actually come down in the helix, but it'll still work just fine. Thread the nut down. You don't have to just put a little tension on there, nothing crazy. And we've broken these loose, but they do have a little bit of Loctite on them from the factory. So if it's the first time they're coming apart, I would definitely suggest adding a little bit of heat. Nothing crazy, but that'll help loosen up the Loctite for you. And then also, when you're heating it, there's plastic buttons right down in here that the helix slides up and down on. Make sure you don't damage those, so don't get crazy with the heat. But just enough to break them loose. Once you get them loose, it's just a matter of getting them loose. And when you do pull these out, there is spring tension built right on there. There's no snap ring or anything else holding in. So that's why you want to have a tool or something to be able to compress it down in there. Once you get them all out, then you slowly let this up. Come off the tool. So again, this is a different clutch than they use on anything else, but you got your little triangle bracket here. This is your helix. And then make sure you keep track of how this stuff comes on and off, but then you have a little plastic spacer in there. And then your spring. And then also, if you want to take it apart and clean it, you can pull this apart, clean them up really good. As you can see, this one's been running. We've been doing a lot of testing with it. It's got some belt buildup and stuff on there. So what you'd want to do is just take a emery scotch pad, emery cloth, rollite sandpaper, and just start outside and edge and kind of go like that all the way around. You don't want to leave any deep scratches, but you just kind of want to buff off that dirty stuff. And then take a clean rag with some brake cleaner and wipe it down all the way around. Don't hose it down with brake cleaner, just wipe it down. And then dry wipe your bushing here. Don't use any brake cleaner on it. But then to put it back together, once you got it cleaned, we'll just pretend we cleaned it there. So I want to make sure my X is lined up. I got my X's here lined up. Throw the spring in there. Make sure you got the plastic piece in. Set that on the spring. Then there's a little ridge here, and then this plastic, and make sure that seats on that helix too. Once you got that seated, then line up your marks. And just compress it down, just like how we took it apart. Again, you want to go nice and slow. You don't want to use an impact wrench or anything on it. Just do it by hand so you don't damage anything. Once you start getting down there, make sure that the point of this helix doesn't come down on these plastic buttons and damage anything there. This will kind of float so you can line up your holes. But you can kind of see it comes down in there. You don't want to super crank on it. You'll want to put some blue Loctite on here, tighten it back up. Otherwise they'll end up vibrating loose on you. Sometimes when you first put it together, you got to wiggle it just a little bit to get everything lined up. That's kind of normal on this one. And I just like to get them all started before you really start cranking them down and tightening them up. But then it's just a matter of tightening them up. And then we pull it out of the tool. Then you can tighten them up all the way and you're pretty much done. Alright, so now we're going to work on the primary. Kind of like secondary, just like to mark things that way you're getting everything put together right, so it's balanced and doesn't throw you out of whack or anything that way. On this one we put an X there, and on the spider we also put one down in there on the side so you can kind of see it from all angles. We also marked some 0 on this side just to keep it squared up good. Slide on the clutch compression tool. We'll tighten this one down a little bit. This way you don't have to go crazy, but you can tighten it down a little bit. Just gives you a little bit more working room. And then you want to remove these, which are 10mm on this one. Once you get all those loose, you just loosen it up. If you don't have a compression tool, this is under spring tension, obviously, so you're going to have to try to hold down that some way or another so it doesn't pop off and wreck anything or damage anything. The tool works good because it doesn't hold everything nice and square as you're taking it apart. I'll show you in a second here. Oops. This one, the spring's a little bit taller, so you just push a little pressure down, take the nut off. There's a bushing in here and you don't want to damage it, so if you take it off and you're not using a compression tool, it can get caught one way or another and damage this soft bushing in here. So just kind of be aware of that. You got a spacer here on the spring. Make sure you keep track of where that is and how it goes. And your spring. Then to remove the weights, it's an 1/8 inch Allen wrench on this side, and this one's a 3/8 here. So do that. Once you pull that bolt out, the weight will come out. You can wiggle them through here, or you can stick them in through the front. But this is your stock weight that would be in your stock machine. To put it back together, stick it through there. Just kind of line everything up as you go. There, it slid in. Make sure your bolt is actually through the weight. And tighten it back up. Your weight's in, and you just repeat that process for the other 2 weights. When you got the clutch apart, a couple things you want to check is you want to clean your surface again, like a Scotch pad like this. Start at the outside edge, go back and forth like this all the way around on both sides. Take a air hose, blow everything out real good, and then a clean rag with some brake cleaner, wipe it down. Make sure that's good. Make sure your 2-way bearing is actually going both directions. That should spin freely both ways. It won't spin for 30 seconds or anything, but it should turn freely. And then just kind of check everything else out, clean it up. Inspect these. These are kind of a new thing on this style clutch. These are the buttons. Make sure they're not broken. Sometimes they'll break out here or just completely be worn out. So inspect those anytime you got your clutches apart. And then once you go to put it back together, it's just a matter of putting your spring back in. Make sure it seats on both ends. Make sure your plastic shim is in there. And again, make sure you line up your X's and your O's or whatever you drew on there. And then to slowly tighten this down again. You want to be careful you don't damage the bushings or anything else in there. But as you tighten this down, you can kind of line up the bolt holes as you go. And then once you get close, you can always lift up this bottom part here and then tighten them up and torque them to the factory specs, and they should be good. Remove that once you got those snugged up. Once you got that done, and I'm just going to quick snug these by hand. Make sure they're good. I don't know the torque spec right off the top of my head, but I know it'll be in the clutch kit instructions for you. And once you got those torqued, your clutch is done and ready to go. Alright, so to get the secondary clutch back on the machine, you're going to want to slide it on. Make sure it gets on there. And sometimes you might have to put the machine in a different gear, so it slides on the shaft all the way. Sometimes it goes right on. Sometimes you gotta move it around a little bit to get it to go on the splines. There we go. Let's clean that up. And then you'll put the washer on first. Then you have this step washer that the snap ring sits in. Slide that on. Snap ring, put this one on. Make sure it's seated on there, which I think I got it. Yep, good. So that'll hold the clutch on, but you always put the bolt on. This one you get torqued to 40 foot-pounds. Just to speed up the video, I'll show you how to quick buzz this on. And then again, you take your clutch tool. This will either be in your toolkit if you don't have one. It's an EPI tool. It's an SCP-2 is the part number. You thread this in, and what that does is it opens up the clutch. And you want to make sure you get this bolted on, otherwise that'll put tension in here when you start spreading it apart sometimes. See, you don't have to go crazy, but if you once it starts, you can feel when there's tension on it, just turn it around a few times. When you put your new belt on, again, make sure that you're facing it so the arrows are facing the right direction. If it doesn't have arrows, make sure you can read it from left to right. If you're putting on a used belt, just make sure you're putting it on whatever same direction it came off. And then just put that in there like that. It's going to stick down in there. Gives you enough slack to get the primary clutch on. Stick your primary clutch through. Slide down the crank. Put your primary clutch bolt in. Make sure you got your extra washers on here. I don't know if you can see those or not. And then this one's torqued to 96 foot-pounds. And again, what you want to use is a small bar or a really big screwdriver. And you torque it. And make sure you're hitting on the outside edge of these towers when you use a bar and not damaging in the middle of the clutch at all. And then wherever your bar rests, make sure you're not going to hit brake lines or electrical lines or anything else in there. Set that like that for a second. And we'll torque this in. Again, it's really important to torque this properly. If you go too tight, it'll be harder to get off and you can damage the clutch or the puller when you try to take off next time. If you don't go tight enough, it can vibrate off when you're riding. But it gets pretty tight. 95 to 96 foot-pounds on that. Once you get that done, pull your bar out. You can unthread this. And then what you'll see is your belt will be stuck down in there. And I'll have to put the machine back in neutral real quick. Once you got it in neutral, just spin the clutch and it'll reset. That way you don't damage anything the first time you take off with it. Then you should be good to go. And the next step is just put your clutch cover on, hook up your vent tube, put your shock back on, and you should be good to go.